Welcome back, honors. Welcome back to your flip classroom and our continuing discussion of all this crazy stuff that's going on pre, post, and after Napoleon, right? The 1800s is a wild time, okay? So the big thing about it, though, is we left off in class talking about the Haitian Revolution, right? We're getting into the time period where Saint-Domingue is going to be this very particular colony that is going to liberate itself from French control and stuff like that in a very, very series of precise tactics and also large-scale revolts that are going to be led by a guy that I absolutely love to talk about, none other than Toussaint L'Ouverture, originally known as Toussaint Breda, also the guy that is famously known as the Black Napoleon, right? Which is a very, very cool figure that we'll talk about a lot in this flip, right? But the thing about it is I've already recorded this in a really, really good fashion this year already, so I'm going to go ahead and clip in that flip that you need to talk about, the Haitian Revolution, because I just feel like I did a good job of telling the story, and I don't want to kind of throw it all off and do it all over again and stuff like that. But it's going to be about 13 minutes, okay? So I'm going to clip that in, but then I'm going to come back here in a second, and we're going to start changing direction, and we're actually going to go back to Europe and start talking about the rise of these political isms that are on the growth in Europe following the exile of Napoleon, all right? So I'll see you all in about 2 seconds. 1,000 of them being slaves. So of course there's going to be a massive history of slave upheaval and revolt, right? So even before the French Revolution, slaves were running away from their masters at high rates and dying in revolts as well. Actually, showing up and staging violent revolts against the white people that owned the actual land or that worked in the actual area. Why is this? Because the slaves were worked practically to death every single day, right? If a slave tried to run away, they could sometimes be maimed or mutilated. And a common punishment on this island if a slave tried to run away is they would be blinded in one of their eyes, right? That is insane, right? That is ridiculous that you would treat another human being in this way. So of course this is going to inspire revolts. Why the French that owned these colonies thought it wouldn't is nuts to me, right? So the thing about it, though, is that slaves began running away at very high rates. They actually established, very commonly, these things known as maroons, which were small runaway communities, right? Little communities spread out all over the island and speckled into the mountains where they would actually create little slave cities and stuff like that, okay? So another big thing about it, though, is you got to understand there's a secondary group of people on this island, okay? They're known as the affranchis, right? The affranchis are free people of color and people of mixed race, okay? The thing about it, though, is that they tried to take control of these slave revolts to gain themselves some more rights. And they actually did end up gaining some more rights to try and suppress some of these slave revolts as well. And what that's going to do is they're going to earn some rights to vote, and they're also going to earn their own right to own slaves as well. But the problem was that this didn't actually fix anything, and it actually made more problems because it set up a social class system like this in Haiti, and it's a very fragile one at that, right? And so the big thing about it is there were the free people of color, also known as the affranchis, spelled A-F-F-R-A-N-C-H-I-E, okay, affranchis. So literally there were only about 20,000 of them, right? And most of the free people of color were either freed slaves that had actually gone off to get educated enough to understand how to actually buy certain amounts of land, run plantations of their own, and also own slaves themselves, which is an absolutely wild setup. Or people that were manumitted by their masters and or people of mixed race, right? Because remember, we talked about this a lot when we were talking about colonization, that most of the Spanish colonists were single men, right? And there weren't very many European women there, so there was a heavy amount of mixed race people as well. At the time, called mulattoes, but I don't like to say that word, all right? So now look, so the other group of people, though, on the other side of this, as you can tell, these are African descendant people on the left, these are white descendant Europeans on the right, and the other people on this side are the Grand Blancs, right? The Grand Blancs, there's about 10,000 of them, right? But here's the screwed up part. They're the ones that own all the land in Saint-Domingue. They are the ones who own all the land in that colony, but most of them don't even live there, right? Most of them live back in France, right? They own all the land and they sign off on the violent tactics used by the Petit Blancs. The Petit Blancs were mostly white laborers, right? Artisans, craft workers, overseers on the plantation, and there's about 30,000 of them. But look at this number right here. But slaves made up 90% of the population. 500,000 people total, right? And the thing about it was that these early slave revolts, when they weren't perfectly solved and when they actually had a history of violence going on in them, they didn't really solve anything by allowing the free people of color to vote and or to own more slaves, right? So what ends up happening is the French Revolution then explodes in 1789, right? Now, this is where everything starts going down, because what we're trying to talk about is how did the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon create calamity in their colonies and lead to major changes in the growth of Latin American countries, right? The self-determined Latin American countries. Haiti would not exist possibly the way it exists now if the French Revolution didn't happen, causing so much hysteria, right? Now, in the French Revolution, the French Revolution explodes in 1789. And what's going to happen is a large number of slaves revolt again, actually inspired by several different voodoo ceremonies that actually happened on the island itself. And there was actually a voodoo high priest that predicted the growth of this, and a hurricane actually swept in, causing massive confusion on the island, and a huge slave revolt broke out, right? The thing about it was that this particular slave revolt was aggressively successful, right? It was extremely successful, and it literally ended up taking over the entire northern province of the island, right? But a big reason why it was so successful is because a man stepped up to lead these people, who was an affranchi himself at the time, but was a former slave also. Born into slavery with a different name and things like that, and grew to actually own a plantation of his own, and also ended up becoming very educated as a young man and stuff like that, and earned his freedom later on in his life. He led this slave revolt, and he is going to be the reason why slavery gets abolished on this island. And his name was, say it with me real quick, he is awesome, he is the man. Look at him right there. He is sometimes historically known as the Black Napoleon, right? Because he was that successful in his military campaigns. But his name was Toussaint Louverture, right? Toussaint Louverture. Now, originally his name was actually Toussaint Breda. Because that is actually the plantation that he was born on to African parents, right? So the thing about it, though, is Toussaint Louverture is a former slave and a self-educated man. Now, not completely what we do believe happened to him, because here's the hard part, y'all. He was born a slave, so we don't know much about his early life. We actually see most of his life really get kicked off when he turned about 50 years old. And as we know already from studying some of those other historical figures, typically your biography tends to wind down in your 50s. Like, Caesar got stabbed when he was about give or take 144. What is that number? 144. Caesar got stabbed in the 60s, right? And then also looking at it as well, Napoleon had taken over all of Europe by the time he was 50, right? Well, Toussaint Louverture is of course, really, really quickly, he changed his name to Louverture because it means the opener of doors, right? Literally, his story gets started in his 50s because he actually, at this point, had been educated himself, and he actually had earned some medical training and actually started working in one of these slave revolts as a field doctor, right? And the thing about it was he was untrained in the military and in political matters, but he used his educated mind and the fact that he knew how to read and write to study the military campaigns of other famous generals, just like Napoleon did, and became a skilled general and diplomat, right? And he took leadership of the slave revolt that broke out in 1791 as it continued to roll forward after the man that started the voodoo ceremony had died, right? And the thing about it is he organized them together. He taught them certain skills. He made it so they weren't a group of militiamen. He turned them into a well-trained army, right? And he led 100,000 men in the slave revolt that began to really wash its way all over the entirety of the colony of Saint-Domingue. And he was so successful, in fact, that literally the other powers in the Caribbean, the Spanish government was literally like, hey, Toussaint, how about you stop being loyal to France and you become an officer in our military? And the deal will be, we will abolish slavery in your colony, but we will get the land as a part of our country, right? And Toussaint considered this very, very heavily. And to stop this from happening, the National Assembly, with Robespierre involved, comes in and says, Toussaint, do not leave France. Stay with us. We need to make money off the sugar and the coffee grown in this colony because we are in the middle of a revolution. So please leave the Spanish army, rejoin us, and we will outlaw slavery. And so Toussaint said, oui, oui. And literally, he got slavery abolished in this colony, right? They're still a part of France at this point, but the thing is he gets the slavery abolished completely and actually becomes a working part of the French government, right? Toussaint Louverture led this revolt and literally accomplished so much in such a short span of his life, right? And as you can see right here in his triumphant victory portrait, he literally actually became the leader of the colony itself, regulated the production of food and goods, made it so they were actually focusing on feeding everyone and making sure also that the colony would run smoothly. But then, of course, we've got this turd who shows up. Now, everything changes when Napoleon comes onto the scene. Because in January of 1802, this is literally almost 10 years into Saint-Domingue being a slavery-free society, the French troops are going to land, in Saint-Domingue. Now, I don't know if y'all remember this or not, But I told you earlier, I don't like Napoleon for two key reasons. One, he was extremely sexist and rude to women and took their rights away. And two, he tried to bring slavery back in one of his colonies. This is that colony, all right? So, this is the colony that he tried to bring slavery back into because he was like, we'll make more money if we go back to using slavery, but this person, Toussaint Louverture, is standing in our way. That is absolutely disgusting, and it's why if Napoleon I meet him in the afterlife, I'm punching him in the face. All right, so look. So the French people, what's going to end up happening is he's going to actually accuse Toussaint of setting up another uprising, right? And he sets up a meeting, and that meeting was actually a trap, right? He didn't even go himself, right? He set a trap for Toussaint Louverture and literally had him arrested and then sent him to prison in the French Alps, where Toussaint Louverture would die about 10 months later. After liberating his people, he died in April of 1803, right? The thing about it was, though, is there's a guy in the realm that I haven't talked about yet, right? There was a man, as we know, all great leaders have assistants in the wings that were there the whole time. And the name of Toussaint Louverture's second in command was a man by the name of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, right? Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who is pictured right here, who had a very different story compared to Toussaint Louverture. Jean-Jacques Dessalines was born a slave himself, but was never set free on his own right or manumitted, right? He lived on one of the most violent slave plantations that existed in Saint-Domingue. He literally witnessed the death of women and children at the hands of white overseers. He himself was tortured on the plantation that he actually worked on. So the thing about it was, Napoleon, you've gone and screwed up because now this man is in charge and he's mad, right? Toussaint's general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, comes into power, and in January 1st, 1804, Jean-Jacques Dessalines declares Haiti to be a new independent country. And he uses guerrilla warfare, and he has a little aid on his side as well, yellow fever, which crushes the French army, right? Guerrilla warfare tactics and the fact that disease swept through the French army and killed so many of them gave Jean-Jacques Dessalines the military upper hand that he needed, right? Now, it becomes the very first black colony to ever free itself from European control and the second colony ever to revolutionize from Europe. It went the United States of America, and then bang, Haiti was the next up, right? And he became the very first emperor of Haiti. Now, Jean-Jacques Dessalines was later assassinated, actually. He was actually stabbed to death in an assassination attempt later on in a revolt. And in 1820, Haiti became an independent republic with democratic elections, right? And most of this was done. Why did all of this happen? It's because it's a massive effect of the French Revolution, okay? So big thing, if you want to write this down, just so you know the thematics of this whole thing, why this all went down and why this all happened is because Napoleon and his campaigns and the French Revolution caused massive confusion in their colonies, giving these people the ability to actually rise up and make countries of their own, right? Same thing happened in South America as well. A man by the name of Simón Bolívar, who has a street in New Orleans named after him and a statue of himself in New Orleans, created the countries of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and liberated themselves from the Spanish while Napoleon was invading Spain, right? Same thing happened as well, like José de San Martín in the southern area of South America, liberated Argentina and Chile, and actually liberated them away from European control and created brand new countries without European influence and without European governments, right? So the thing about it is Napoleon and his campaigns caused that much confusion that Latin American countries came into the world and became countries of their own. But that right there is where we're going to end this flip. We'll talk more about it, and we'll go a little bit deeper in our warm-up tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and all these other characters as well, and we'll get a little bit more intense with it, okay? But welcome back, honors. I know, 2 welcome back honors in one in one flip. It's crazy, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is thank you so much for watching that stuff and stuff like that and getting your content in. But now we're going to be changing directions again, right? So, we're now about to leave Haiti. We're actually about to bop back over to Europe and talk about what's going to go on following Napoleon's exile, right? So what we're getting into now is a time period that Mr. Terry likes to refer to as the rise of the isms, right? So now the isms is all these terms that are going to be popping up in the 1800s in Europe following the exile of Napoleon. A lot of them have to do with the political perspectives of the people back in Europe, right? For example, we're going to talk about conservatism, socialism, liberalism, nationalism, and then in our next unit, imperialism, right? So, and the whole reason why they're called the isms is because they all just end with ISM. So the biggest thing about it, though, is let's go ahead and dive headfirst into this, okay? So number one thing you need to do right now is if I tell you not to write something, don't write it, all right? Because it's a lot of stuff on this, like this Prezi, that are actually from COVID school, and they were actually used back a couple years ago to make it so if a kid was like muting it, they still had some extra words that they could like read back over and stuff like that, because I wasn't trusting children to actually fully listen. So like the big thing about it is like if I tell you not to write something down, don't write something down. For example, don't write this down. But what we're getting into right now, do not write this down, is all these crazy new thought patterns and how it affected everybody, okay? We're going to be bouncing around. So if you wanted to change colors or something like that, it's a good time to change colors, Haley Ruther, because this is going to be talking about the years of 1815 leading up to about like 1914, 1848, whatever, okay? So this is going to be insane, all right? So it's going to be all over the place. It's going to feel really chaotic, but you just got to try and cook it down to its base ideas, right? It's simple understandings, because I promise you, if you don't think about it too hard, it won't hurt, all right? So now look, be prepared to jump around the world, around the timeline, and also you're going to need to reject what you think you know, all right? So, like, because a lot of y'all might have actually had conversations with your parents, or conversations with family relatives, or conversations with the television that talks about the ideas of conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. And we're actually going to be talking about these perspectives in the 1800s when they were drastically different from what they are now, all right? So, like, but let's go ahead and get into it and talk about this crazy Europe that Napoleon left behind, right? So the way I like to think about it a lot is that basically Europe was like this really, really big pane of glass, right? This big pane of glass that was looking really, really nice for a little while, but then Napoleon came along and did this to that pane of glass. Exactly. It kind of dramatically just destroyed and broke everything, right? Now, since Napoleon has shattered what that pane of glass was, which was like absolute authority, no legislative bodies, voting, who does that? The French Revolution and Napoleon comes around and spreads the ideas of the Enlightenment, and it starts leading to a lot of really, really chaotic stuff, right? So following the Napoleonic era, the world has been turned upside down, right? You literally have that broken pane of glass, and now the Europeans are going to have to come together and try to figure out how to put it all back together, because their understanding of what normal was has now been destroyed, right? Because the idea that normal for them used to be that pane of glass that said absolutism, nobility, rank, privilege, monarchs, mercantilism, blah. It like literally is now gone, right? And it's now been destroyed. And basically, Napoleon has done this. A phrase known as opened up a can of worms, right? And my favorite part about saying can of worms is this clip from Friends.
God, can open worms everywhere?
And so basically what the saying goes, thank you, Chandler. Basically what the saying goes, though, is it's basically saying that Napoleon has opened up this can of worms, his ideas, and the worms are now everywhere and you can't put them all back in, right? And the ideas that have now began to spread all over the continent are the ideas of, like, oh, by the way, don't write this. All right, so like, now, anyway, so don't write that. It's not a big deal. But the ideas of liberty and equality and fraternity and the Enlightenment are now spreading all over the continent. And you also got to think about it. So many things are affecting the understanding of the world for the regular European. They've seen wars now. They've seen the Enlightenment. They've seen Industrial Revolution. They've seen absolutism. They've seen constitutionalism pop up in France, mercantilism, colonial empires, just to say a few things. But the average European's mind is being torn in 1,000 different directions following the exile of Napoleon because of the things that have been happening, right? And also because the ideas of the Enlightenment are spreading so quickly. Well, the thing about it is that following Napoleon's exile in 1815, a bunch of European powers are going to get together and decide to reorganize everything. They want to come back together and they want to mush all the parts together, right? They want to genuinely bring all these different chunks back together to try and make it so it's back as close to the way it was before things went down. And so they're going to hold a meeting to try and put that pane of glass back together, right? All the conservatives and all the powers of Europe get together to try and mush that pane of glass back together, right? And the idea basically is that they want to try and fix everything in their mindset. But remember, their mindset is that of rich people who have always been in power, right? So the Congress of Vienna would be held by these rich people that have always been in power to try and fix all those problems, right? The meeting was trying to help rebalance Europe, right? Now check this out, write down this phrase. When I say rebalance, I basically mean the balance of power, right? The balance of power, quote unquote. And the balance of power is basically trying to make sure that Europe stops looking like this, which is like a Master of Puppets song to a lot of these Europeans, and they want to create what they call the concert of Europe. Go ahead and jot that down. The concert of Europe, which my band kids will get, to them looks more like this. Because the powers, the great powers of Europe, including Russia, Prussia, Austria, France, and Great Britain, are now evenly split up and all balanced out. Just like a classical orchestra piece where all the music is playing in time when it's supposed to play, right? The goal is to try and split up whatever Napoleon took over and to try and give power back to give control of Europe back to give control of Europe back to the four big powers: Great Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. Now, I have a star next to Prussia for a reason, because you don't know who they are, but what Prussia basically is, Prussia is basically baby Germany, right? It's baby Germany. It's little toddler Germany, right? Like little baby Germany, okay? So the thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, Prussia will eventually disappear, and then it's going to be gone forever, right? Russia, Prussia, and Austria, though, are considered at the time to be very conservative, right? Now, see, the thing about it is you don't know what conservative means. And go ahead and let out a big cry, because this is what conservative means, all right? So this is going to be the last slide that we stop with in this flip, okay? And then we'll talk about liberalism and socialism during class, right? But conservative, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, what they are is basically they are the old guard, right? They are the wealthy, the ones that have been around for forever, the nobles, the lords, the marquises, the barons, the dukes, the people that have always ruled over Europe since the Middle Ages, those hereditary monarchical families, right? The Bourbons is a good example of a conservative during this time period. Because the big thing about it is you got to look at their actions and who they represent and what they're trying to do. They're called conservatives because they're trying to conserve the old ways of Europe. They don't want to go away from absolutism because that's what they like. And you could see this in their actions at the Congress of Vienna because they tried to restore absolutism back to France following Napoleon's exile in 1815. They wanted to restore the Bourbon monarchy, right? And also, the conservative superhero that literally was around during this time period is this man right there. Go ahead and write his name down. He's very important. His name is Clemens von Metternich, right? K-L-E-M-E-N-S, von, V-O-N, Metternich, M-E-T-T-E-R-N-I-C-H. He is an Austrian prince, right? An Austrian prince that's one of the old princes, from one of the old families of princes that actually hid Martin Luther during the Revolution, right? But the thing about it is, Prince Clemens von Metternich represents the conservatives at the Congress of Vienna, and he says that we need to go back to absolutism, right? He says that we need to suppress any new revolutions that pop up because the Enlightenment scares the daylights out of them, right? Because they're like, oh, poor people think they have freedom of speech and rights and stuff. Ew. So the big thing about it, though, as well, is they want to present and destroy any constitutions that can pop up. Because what do constitutions do, y'all? Ever since the Magna Carta, constitutions have given people rights, right? It is said that you can and can't do this to an individual. They want to stop the growth of legislative bodies. They like no suffrage whatsoever. They don't want people voting because they think people can't be trusted with their votes, right? They want to keep the money in the elite classes. They love mercantilism. They love heavy government involvement in the economy. Who likes this stuff? But the old nobles and the aristocrats. But we'll talk more about this stuff when we get back to class, and then we'll talk about classical liberalism, socialism, and the lead up to the revolutions of 1848. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.